Thank you very much, Dr. Lynn. Thank you very much, Mann Library, for inviting us to come and present here in Chats in the Stacks. And thank you to those of you on Zoom. We look forward to an opportunity for a conversation at the end of this short presentation to talk more about the book. For those of you who are technology competent, you can point your phone to that QR code and you can download a copy. I'll also show the QR code at the end, and we also have a flyer that has the QR code. But we're very happy that this book is open access, and we hope that it will be widely shared. It's also on sale right now, a 20% discount, but they seem to always have it on sale for a 20% discount. Why did we write this book? So John and I both are experts on community development. And while John is fully engaged and focused on schools, my work has been much more focused on local government and on economic development. And schools are often ignored by community developers. And it's kind of weird because they're a really critical institution in every community. And so the purpose of writing this book was to lay out the promise and the potential that schools could play as a community development institution. And how might we incorporate schools better, not just in educational policy, but also in community development policy. So the hope was that community development leaders and planners who don't pay enough attention to schools, and school leaders who, despite all the things we ask them to do, might pay a little more attention to community, could come together and work as community development actors. So the book has 4 sections. The first is the theoretical setup and talks about demographics and post-COVID effects. The second talks about the economic development connections, and this is where the word conflict in the subtitle comes. Because our primary economic development policy in the United States is tax abatements, and because schools receive the majority of property taxes, they are the most heavily hurt by tax abatements, and yet they're almost never at the table when tax abatements are being discussed. There's also a challenge going on with school buildings and how we're going to reuse them or close them with changing population dynamics. And I think we're missing the opportunity to think of them as resources for the broader community. The third section of the book is on shared services. And this is where the promise comes. We look at the potential of shared services between communities and schools, and particularly the impact of school-based health centers. And John will join for that part of the conversation. And then we end the book with a future promise as well as challenges. So if we can bring economic development and schools together out of their silos, maybe we can have a broader community development agenda. And we also need to recognize the critical role that schools play in building a sense of belonging and creating what we call a creative democracy in our society. And that right now is under threat. So there's just a picture of the table of contents of part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 that I just outlined. And because I want to have time to get to the discussion, I'm going to move on because the theoretical framework is shown in this flower. When we think of schools as being important for their financial resources, their institutional resources, their physical plant, and their social role in society. And at the bottom of all that is the demographic change that they're the first to see because our youngest members come there first. So if we go around this flower, schools have a tax base. So they're a community institution that has a funding source. Nonprofits are always running for grants for this, that, and the other, but the schools have a regular funding source through our property tax and through state aid. And the concern of this book in the second section was that economic development policy gives this away, and we should think about the trade-offs when we do that. On the institutional side, schools have professional staff. Most teachers have master's degrees. There's a lot of human capital, a lot of talent in the school, and they play an important role in community governance. From terms of physical capital, schools have buildings, gyms, playgrounds, libraries, fleets of buses. These are resources primarily focused on the school that might also have benefit more broadly in the community. And in the social area, schools create this sense of belonging that is so critical in a heterogeneous society like ours. And the foundation of it all is the demographic change. And children are our future, and our future shows us that our future society is going to be much more diverse racially, but we have very high levels of child poverty, which doesn't set us up well for success as a society. And we have the COVID effects, which we're still reeling from. So let's talk about demographic change. In chapter 2, Jason Reese, who is a provost at Ohio State University, talks about the increasing demographic diversity of children in our society. Over 50% of children are non-white in 2020. This is what the future, demographers, David, always talk about demography is destiny. And so how your children look is how your society is going to look when they grow up. Even as residential segregation has declined, school segregation has increased. This is a problem. This is a problem for education quality, and this is a problem for societal unity. And high child poverty is a concern that we need to address. COVID-19 was devastating. The educational losses that occurred during that period have not been regained. And the social, emotional impacts are huge. Children face huge mental health issues. We have not recovered. And at this point, we need more investment than ever to begin to address those concerns. On the conflict side, economic development policy, because it's so focused on tax abatements and because schools are so dependent on the property tax, it really puts it at odds with school quality. And we need to have a conversation about that. And Christine Wen and Greg Leroy from Good Jobs First have been tracking that because the new government accounting standards require reporting on what they call tax expenditures, which are tax abatements. Money not collected is actually, they're saying, treat it like a tax expenditure and abatement. And we looked at what the impact is, and it should be no surprise to you that the tax abatements hurt districts with higher need and lower income the most. Economic development is focused on places that don't have enough economic development, which tend to be your higher need, lower income places. So it stands to reason that if your primary economic development tool is a tax abatement, the tax abatement is going to have the greatest impact on children in those school districts. And we need to think about what we do about that. And I know in New York State, for the last 2 years running, the Assembly has put forward a bill to exempt schools from tax abatements. Doesn't get anywhere, but the conversation should be had. And that's what research enables us to look at the disparate impacts. In chapter 4, Jason Reese and Abu Ghalim give us an example of a case study from the city of Columbus, Ohio, where again, the tax abatements are affecting most seriously the children in the inner city schools. And so we need to think about that. But let's go to promise. Schools can be community development institutions, and in chapter 5, Ariel Bierbaum and her colleagues talk about Baltimore's program to rebuild urban schools with full community services. I don't know if you've heard of the idea of a community school that provides child care, job training, health care, meals, even dinner for families that are hungry, runs a food pantry. And so it's a full community service operation. And these schools are being redeveloped to enable them to more effectively serve these broader community needs in their distressed communities. Mary Filardo is the director of the 21st Century School Fund, and she points out that we have a lot of schools that need to be refurbished in the 21st century, and we need to think creatively about how we're going to do that. She calls for new visions and plans, and think about how schools and our investment in school buildings can help strengthen our low-wealth neighborhoods and communities. It's a promise, an opportunity we shouldn't let pass us by. So moving to the third section of the book, where it's all about promise, we talk about joint use and shared services. And you say, what's that? Well, it could be a shared gym, library, sports field, computer lab with the community. It could be a back office service like joint purchasing for fuels, supplies, and insurance. You know how there's this thing called economies of scale? And if you partner with other local governments and schools, you might be able to reduce your cost on these back office services, which gives you more money to spend on the core function, which is teaching the kids. And then there could be shared programming, nutrition, meals, healthcare, and we'll talk about that in the next chapters. In chapter 6, I and my colleague, Dr. Shuai Zhang from Penn State University, talk about a national survey we did across the entire country on shared services between communities and schools. And then in chapter 7, John Sipple will join to talk about work we did here in New York State, looking at shared services across schools. And unfortunately, we saw it was least where most needed. So that's something we need to work on. Couple of pictures, because it's boring to just always look at words. So you say a school is a food pantry? Sure. It's got a facility. It's a place that people feel comfortable going. And you saw a lot of school response at times of crisis. What about parks? The goal is that every child, and every adult for that matter, should be within a half mile of a park so we can get exercise. But our low-income and rural communities don't have parks, or they certainly don't have them within a half mile. But the schoolyard could be that. On the left, you see a schoolyard that said, this is not a public playground, it's district property. Violators and trespassers will be prosecuted. I would like to see such signs disappear from schoolyards all over America and instead look like the pictures on the right, where children are invited to play and older adults are also invited to come and enjoy the resource. Transportation. Only about 15% of communities in America have a public transit system. Every community in America has a public transit system called the school bus. But we only let little kids ride it. And sometimes they misbehave and we have to hire adults to ride on it as monitors. Well, how about thinking about integrating and allowing older adults who need a way to get to healthcare or social services to take the bus? Many older adults can handle the 3 steps up. Not everybody needs a wheelchair accessible school bus. In New York City, one place in this state that has better public transit than anybody, they still have neighborhoods that don't have adequate transit. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, when the school buses are done, they go to senior housing and they take folks to the grocery store. And they love it. We'd ask in the survey, how common is this? 11% of communities said they do it too. How about shared computer labs? Older adults, I'm sorry, a lot of us are a little bit behind on technology, and kids are leading the way, and every school has a computer lab. And not only does this allow for intergenerational programming and knowledge exchange, but it also allows us to get to know each other, and to get to know each other across diversity and difference. In Charlotte, North Carolina, they have a team at the county level that's the capital infrastructure planning team. So the transit guys and the school guys and the library folks and the social service folks all get together and talk about their building needs. And this one's interesting because they were building a new elementary school, the blue roof in the back, next to a park and ride for the light rail. They needed a parking lot. It's on a hill, and the school needed a ball field. The roof of the parking garage is flat, and notice it's at the same level as the school. Isn't that cool? I mean, we can do this. Just need to have a little creative thinking. So what gets you there? What we discovered, which is really interesting from the national survey, we thought, well, you need power over schools to make them play. No, that isn't what makes the difference. Notice the thickest line in that graphic is power with schools, shared power to play together. Well, that's good because we don't have that much power over schools anyway. So it's good that it's shared power that takes us there. A common vision also takes us there. A commitment to age-friendly planning, so thinking about the needs of children, the needs of working age folks, and the needs of older adults all together. And funding, of course, and trust. We can do this. We can work together. Rural New York, we're in rural New York right now, kind of feels passed over and left behind. but the school is often the best building in town. This is a picture of Sydney Middle School, and that room right in the front on the bottom is a healthcare center. And with that, I turn it to John.
Thank you, Mildred. It's on. Thanks for the great setup, and thanks for taking the lead on this project. It is so, putting a book together and gathering all these different authors is no simple task, and she has successfully herded cats to get this thing to happen. And then, in addition, got it not just in print for sale, but got it in print and it's free, which is really a remarkable contribution. There's a great irony what I want to talk about now, and I'll be super quick. Right now, over at the TST BOCES, is a community meeting that's incorporating 13, 14 different communities coming together of how they can regionally share services. I was asked to participate in that and could not be there because we're talking about shared services here today and joint use delivery and so forth. But this is in action, again, run by the BOCES, kind of taking the leadership, Lily Talcott run the show, and they're reaching out to all these different local school boards and school personnel to how we can create more shared services across these. That's all within the school systems. Ideally, there's additional people brought into the conversation from healthcare and from housing and from other aspects of a community, the food systems and so forth, that can be part of that conversation as well. So that's taking place literally as we're speaking now, and I'm gonna run over there after we get done today. I wanted to just put a little bit of a finer point on these shared services, because often we say the word, and it's a little hard to see what we mean. So if you dive into these different chapters, you'll see the variety of choices, variety of options where we actually have been sharing. So I just made a quick list of community services versus administrative services, and that's just kind of a broad collection of the two different types. And you might argue that the administrative services, the goals there would be to save some money. Get more purchasing power and get better rates. Share some tax collection services across, hire a couple experts that can serve multiple communities and so forth. Purchasing health insurance together across multiple communities, multiple jurisdictions, schools and municipal governments and so forth. Why not? You can get better rates when you pool together, and those are not about enhancing program in the schools for the children. They're about other more bureaucratic efficiencies, quite important. On the community side of it is what can help the kids that are attending the schools, but also the broader people in the community. What can help them? I had a conversation not too long ago with a very prickly taxpayer from a community who would vote down every time they go to the polls in May to vote for the school budget, we vote no. And this was not in a local community, it was a different part of New York State. And this adult and the taxpayer in the community said, why should I vote for that? It more money for the schools, teachers make more money, none of them live here. All the teachers commuted from another community. And we're trying to educate our kids better. When these kids get educated, they leave the community. How is this helping me? If you think about that, it's a really pretty remarkable question of what's in it for the community when you start educating your kids, taking your local resources, matching it with the state resources, and you educate your kids. And so these kids disappear. And then the employees that you think would help support local businesses, if they don't live in that community, they live outside the community. This happens more frequently in rural areas and sometimes urban areas. Those salaries that we're paying with our tax dollars are benefiting other communities and not ours. So you need to think about this interaction between the community well-being and the schools in a way that's fundamentally different, not as isolated silos, but as really integrated systems. So you can see the range of ways which we kind of measure this. And there's a bunch of details in the chapter about why school personnel are engaging in certain practices and not others and so forth. But you can see just the sheer tally of these, that the most community services are in the smallest schools. Okay, so the smallest districts are engaged more often in these activities. And the largest districts, which are the ones to the right, the large 5,000 and larger school districts, engage the least. Still engaging in 63% of the activities there, but not as many. So as the smaller the community, the the more they need to reach out. They recognize this. They're doing a lot of these shared services. Okay, the state's getting an earful now because they're requiring every school district to report on their shared services. But there's a lot of this that goes on. And one thing that I work on, and Mildred certainly works on, is to have these shared services, not just between school districts, not just between educators, but between the educators and the healthcare systems and the other systems in a community. Which brings us to the next chapter, which is about school-based health, which is what a joining of efforts, what a joining of expertise and a commitment to bring the healthcare sector together with the educational sector to better serve kids and families. But right now, New York State policy is the only kids that can be served in these healthcare providers inside a school building. So full-fledged somatic health, mental health, dental health inside a school building. The only people that can be served by those school-based clinics are students enrolled in that particular school building. So if they're a high school kid, cannot come over and use that. If there's a separate building, can't come use that. If it's a K-12 building, the high school kids can use that. If little Joey is a kindergartner, can be seen in this clinic, but his little sister, who's 2 years old, the 2-year-old sister cannot be seen. So we're working with some state policy, the policy clinic over in the Brooks School to develop some legislation to bring these things closer together. So this chapter brings kind of an introduction to school-based clinics, and we focus our empirical work on this on an area, quite a rural area centered around Cooperstown. Cooperstown is where the Bassett Healthcare Network is, and there's a very special individual named Chris Colheed. Chris is a pediatrician who has been running these school-based clinics for well over 20, almost 30 years. And they're in 16 different school districts and 21 different school-based clinics. And you can see this region in which we studied. And so these are all quite rural districts, all relatively poor with some variability around that. The distinguishing features between the red districts that are served by a school-based clinic and those white districts that don't have a school-based clinic are demographically pretty similar. There's some very minor differences between the two. And so we're really trying to study what impact do these school-based clinics have, not only on the students that attend the school buildings, that receive this care on a daily basis, receive the health care on a daily basis, the mental health care on a daily basis, but how does the broader community benefit? How do the parents benefit? How do the grandparents benefit from having access to these clinics? And especially if we can broaden the legality of who can be served by these clinics and kind of expand the catchment area there. So we have a number of studies that we're doing on this, access to emergency room care, school attendance and so forth. And there's really positive attributes of these clinics on there, but you can read the details in the chapters. But two quick examples of shared services, and then a particular form of shared service about these school-based health clinics are a great way to think about how we can enhance community development with a more thorough connectivity across the community and between these different agencies, between these different municipal structures. So let me stop there.
Thank you, John. So John talked about the need for policy change. So one of the policy changes that we'd like to see is that school-based healthcare centers, which are in these rural healthcare deserts where there are many doctors' offices left, could also serve parents and younger children nights and weekends. Why not? You've stood up a clinic. You could run it after hours.
Just makes sense.
Just makes sense. Exactly. So that's the kind of macro level policy change that we need that links economic, community development, and health. And that's the kind of things with the kind of professionalism that you have inside the school and in the community development workforce, we can push for those changes. At the meso level, the community and the school collaborating together to make those healthcare centers happen, for example, because they're only in half the districts, and it takes a lot to make it come together. It's not easy to do. And so that takes leadership at the community level. And then together, both of those groups are working on the final target, which is at the micro level, making better lives for children and families. And so we're trying to think in a comprehensive way in that regard. And this is where schools are really interesting, because when you think about coming together with multi-agency collaboration, you think about the common agenda, what sits in the middle that we can all agree on. That's hard. But actually, that's the easy part. If you go out on the petals of that flower, you see the uncommon agendas. the thing that schools are interested in that maybe the industrial development agencies aren't. And how do we get to the outside dotted line where we have a comprehensive agenda and we can hear across diverse voices and come together, not always agreeing, but putting it in a bigger frame with a broader goal, which I think we all do agree on, which is the health and well-being of our children and our communities. So this book is about breaking silos. We have the silo of the public schools and the silo of economic development, which was a particular target in section 2 of this book. And how do we bring and find some more common agenda between those, accommodating these diverse voices, figuring out ways to share power, since that seems to be the secret to action, promoting more collaboration, and building more belonging across generation, class, and race. And this is where public schools have a special role to play. I can hardly think of any institution in society that does a better job of bringing us together across race, age, and class differences than the public school. It's a treasure. And from that treasure come the skills to engage across difference, which is where creative democracy is born. And from that can come the school, the broader school and community development agenda. So that's the real promise I see. But there are new challenges since this book was written. It only came out in August. And schools have always been on the front line of societal challenges. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, children's mental health has worsened since the pandemic. It's a real crisis. And schools are trying to balance the concerns with health and well-being, the concerns with democracy and voice, and the concerns with diversity and equity. Most recently, we've heard discussion of dismantling the Federal Department of Education. Data is disappearing, which will make it difficult to do research in the future. There's loss of programs that are about supporting equity because the federal department mostly supports children with special needs. There have been new restrictions on curriculum. They're being discussed this week by the Supreme Court on parental voice to limit diverse views. Moms for Liberty is a book banning group. There are attacks on LGBTQ youth. These are our children. These are our future. We need to figure out better ways to protect their well-being. Why did we write this book? We wrote this book for all the school and community leaders who are trying to build a better world for all of us. And we do this for our children and our communities. This is my school. These are my kids and my grandson who turns 4 this summer and will start preschool in the fall. This is our future. And this is why we do this work. So if you want a copy, once again, you get a chance to aim your phone at it and try to catch it. And feel free to share widely because it's open access, which we're really pleased about. And I'd like to ask John to come back up and we'll open the floor for questions and comments because I think this is a really good time to have a discussion. And so does anyone have a question? Yes, in the back of the room, it sounds like there's a question from online.
Yes, is this work? Yes, okay. So we do have a number of questions from the online audience. I'll just do one now and then we'll let.
They only see us here, John. Yeah, there. Not on. Yeah.
All right, I will speak up. Does it need policy change to insist that school districts use their health clinics this way? Or is there actually a policy that exists that's a barrier to the use of school-based health clinics for the wider community?
Yeah. Pretty clear New York State Department of Health regulation around these things, around the school-based clinics, about the who can access them, who can be served, what it takes to actually open a clinic in terms of regulation and the qualifications of the people working within there. A lot of HIPAA and FERPA is where the schools and the healthcare system coming together. You get FERPA regulations from the schools and HIPAA regulations from the hospitals and the healthcare system. But pretty clear regulation that the only people that can be served, the only children that can be seen, are those enrolled in official attendance roster of the building in which it sits. And so it's a regulation that can be changed, but it's pretty clear right now. And there's some effort underway right now to broaden access to other folks, other little kids, like 1, 2, 3, 4-year-olds in the community that will eventually enroll in that building. There's one creative story by a superintendent who understood this limitation years ago. It's probably a decade ago. And this is a superintendent who never took no for an answer. He was determined to get the younger siblings of kids in his building and the new little future students in his community access to the healthcare system. So he created a brand new educational program. And that educational program, you could enroll 1-year-old and 2-year-olds into the program. And the parents would come with the kid and go into the school for this little program, this educational program. So they were enrolled in the school so they could be seen in the healthcare system. So there's a little bit of stretching the boundaries there, but he was not going to take no for an answer. But for the rest of the state, it would require some changes in law.
But other states already do it. So New York can just get with the program.
Yeah.
And that's why the students over at the Brooks School are looking. Other states do it. This is how they do it. You can too. So that's the possibility.
I'll just add that Rachel then said, just have to say that the idea about healthcare clinics in schools is so genius, and I've never heard of it before. Also, Mildred and John are both absolutely fantastic speakers, and I love this presentation. Very well said, very clear and straightforward.
I think we have about 3,000 school-based healthcare centers across the country. Does that seem
about right? It's about right. There's a national census that a professional organization does, but they vary a little bit in terms of what they include. New York State has got really full service school-based clinics. Sometimes the definition of a school-based clinic in another state might be something a little less comprehensive than what we have.
But we have 13,000 school districts. So why don't we have 13,000 healthcare centers? Take a classroom. The child population is declining, right? People aren't having as many kids. So we have empty classrooms in a lot of our schools. Turn them into a school-based healthcare clinic. What's so cool about it is you don't have to take off work to go take your kid to the doctor. The kid's sick, they go down the hall, they see the doctor, they only miss 30 minutes of class, not a half day. They learn how to be their own healthcare consumer, which is really cool. So they develop really good healthcare engagement practices, which follow them into adulthood, which is something that you're actually looking at with the research.
Yep. And certainly promotes better attendance patterns for the exact same reason Mildred just talked about. You're not pulling kids out of school to miss a day of school. They're in there much better. David.
Is this working?
Yes.
In theory.
So thank you for the shout out earlier. You said that there's David, he's a demographer, and these demographers believe that demography is destiny. But I actually do not believe that demography is destiny. But I think that a lot of people assume that that's the case. So you hear a lot about things like the replacement theory. People are concerned about changing the race ethnic composition of the country, and something automatically is going to result from that demographic change. I think your book is really timely because the impacts of demographic change are contingent on local community organization, the decisions that are made locally, the resources that are locally and that can be aggregated. And the same demographic change in similar communities can have dramatically different impacts depending on these types of decisions. So population matters, but demography is not destiny.
Thank you, David. So I was thinking of the demographic realities of so many kids born today. There won't be more kids next year that were born last year. That's a given. But what you do with that demographic projection, that's up to the community. And we are a society that is aging and shrinking. Shrinking and aging. We have all these wonderful schools that we're shutting down because we don't have as many children. And we have all these older adults who need somewhere to go for adult daycare, for group congregate meal sites, for social interaction. Think about the school as a community resource for all. Education should be lifelong. We can start thinking about what that looks like. So before we shutter our fabulous school institution, let's make it an institution for all of us. And I think it could be very dynamic and exciting, what could come on the other side of that.
Thank you both for raising these very important issues. And I love the idea of like comprehensive solutions and like being able to leverage the scope of issues to be efficient. And like, you know, you mentioned the idea of like community-based schools. And I think with like a lot of the examples that you noted were like in in rural areas. And I was wondering if like you had, any of you, both of you have had experience or I've heard about like these same kind of programs in urban areas, and like how are they able to leverage deal with the like certain concerns that may come specifically to like urban areas. So specifically for me, I'm from like Philadelphia, and I think ideas like this would be very great and beneficial to like the public school district. But then there are specific concerns with like community safety and like violence. So like how do you scale up programs like these while also maintaining safety?
So these are really important concerns. And I have to tell you, this stuff started urban. So the community schools movement started in urban areas.
School-based health started in urban areas. Yeah.
You know, the Harlan Children's Zone, that's a full wraparound program, started in urban areas. John and I are biased toward rural because rural kind of lags behind, and we're kind of interested in pushing that forward. But
in Mildred's sign, that your favorite sign up there, you can go back to that sign.
Oh, the one that don't,
Yes.
yeah, that's urban.
Well, that's
rural
rural as well.
Oh, okay.
There's liability issues are enormous. They don't want any adult on that playground because because who knows what can happen. And that's an urban issue, and that's a suburban issue, and that's a rural issue.
And it's not a problem. Everybody says liability is a problem. Anybody who's a manager of a school district knows how to handle liability insurance. Insurance is written for everybody. Any local government will tell you their insurance policy covers everybody at the public park. The school policy actually covers everybody too. So on all of our surveys, liability, the top barrier, and it has no effect on the level of shared services that people do, because smart public managers know how to deal with it, and you deal with it with insurance. Safety is both real and perceptual. And so I have former students who are architects. One's down in Texas, and she's worked because their population is growing. So they're building new schools, and they're building them with the idea from the very beginning that the library is going to be shared, and in the afternoons and evening, it's going to be the district library for the neighborhood. That the gym is going to be shared, that the cafeteria will be shared with like a third lunch period. And so recognizing the very real concerns about safety, architecturally, they're building the building with issues of security in mind. How much can you safely mix the populations, and what kinds of architectural designs can you use that make it possible to ensure safety? It can be done. We are creative people. We can do it. So when you run, part of the purpose of this book is to say to the naysayers, you can do it. And in Philadelphia, look up Ariel Bierbaum's work. She's in chapter 5, but she's got a new book coming out, and Philadelphia is part of her case study. So stuff has happened in your hometown.
Another interesting thing about the urban areas, that's where so much of the last 20 years, the real press for school choice. There's been a lot more options in the urban areas than anywhere else. And so the notion of a neighborhood school, and that this is our school in this neighborhood, is kind of an old-fashioned, kind of quaint notion now. It still happens in a lot of the more rural areas. But in the urban areas, there's so much choice with different charter schools and voucher programs, and the demands, the kind of market responding to the demands of parents wanting a better place for their kid to go to school, creates a very different dynamic in the local community. If everyone agrees that this is our local school, and we can have these various social services and community spaces for adults, young and old, to participate in these schools. But all of a sudden, due to choice, and kids are going to school all over the place, you kind of lose that local nature. And that's something that's quite intriguing to me. And I don't quite know how, in our research world, how that's on our agenda yet. But it's a fundamental difference, because we don't have that many choice opportunities elsewhere. In the urban areas, there's a lot. And so how does this impact the community school concept. More other than, you know, them being kind of a lighthouse in the communities, that we this school is a community school. So we have all kinds of services here. So to try to attract more people from different parts of the city to come to their school, because they're operating in a free market. The more students they get, the more money they get, and the more they can serve. So it's an interesting question, an important question.
So David in the back and then you in the front.
Thank you very much for excellent presentations. I have actually a lot of questions, but I'll limit it to one. Thinking about New York for a second, I think it's the case that, well, I've heard it said many times that New York State has more levels of government, more municipal units, more municipal entities than any other state. So it would make a lot of sense to think about shared services from the administrative side, where particularly under-resourced school districts and communities might be able to share administrative services. So I was wondering if you could speak to that right-hand side of that slide where you had a list, I think, John, of administrative services, and how would those things actually come together? I'm thinking primarily from the financing side, because I could imagine, you know, if you had a school superintendent that was really got the message and who was really creative, I could see it working. I could also see it, schools might feel jealous about the use of their resources, particularly if they're not being paid for explicitly. So how do you see that coming together in a practical way?
So we have the Board of Cooperative Education Services here, which is a multi-county entity precisely to encourage shared services, mostly focused on the educational function, but they also do things like bulk purchasing of fuel to get a better contract. Schools, everybody in a school has a bachelor's degree. Not all your town and village officials do. In fact, most do not. So in many ways, the technical expertise is possibly greater in the school than it is in these little small, particularly rural towns and villages. And so the opportunity to share fleet management or cleaning off salt, which is actually a big issue, I'm talking the back office ones, you can work this out. When it comes to community services, it requires a change in thinking. That the school is only for children age 5 to 18, everyone else must stay away, to thinking about the school as an educational institution in the community, primarily focused on the 5 to 18 population, but not exclusively. And supporting that broader population supports the rest of us. And there's a whole, on the web, you can find all sorts of, you know, best practices on community school use agreements. The Berkeley Center for Communities and Schools has a lot of recommended best practices you can do. Schools will often do it because it builds goodwill and it builds happy taxpayers. Every Wednesday night, I go down to the Groton High School band room, and we have the intergenerational community band. And there's everybody in there from age 12 to 80 playing music together. It's joyful. And the school gives it to us. I think it's a good gift. But anyway, John.
Yeah, a great question. It's really important to think mechanically, how does this happen? And I think from what we've found from our research is that some of these arrangements are very informal. You know, so you might have a village that's got a lot of snowplow equipment. They happen to have some snowplows. And the school district buys a lot of lawn mowing machines. And informally, they say, if you plow some of our sidewalks and so forth, we'll cut some of your grass. And none of it's ever written down. It's just the shared. But that comes from trust and liability issues and so forth. We can see this informally. All the times they're purchasing things together. And that's a little dicier, depending on the source of money, what you're allowed to do and not. So when people around the state were trying to identify impediments to this kind of shared services, they mentioned a lot of that kind of thing. So if the village of Cayuga Heights wants to purchase something and the school district wants to purchase something, there may be rules in the whatever they're trying to purchase around there that prohibit that. So that's where you might get more informal arrangements. But I think being really super creative, you know, you have an enormous bus garage and a warehouse, you know, all the bus fixing, the repair service down across the river. Could not all the municipalities use that facility when they're not fixing buses all the time, and either contract for it and actually have dollars change, or just kind of with a wink and a nod, yeah, this Saturday if it's free, go use it with your own mechanic kind of thing. So you see this very creative uses in some places where they have communication, where they have this view that we're all in this together. And others, my goodness, you raise these issues in some communities and people just, they bristle because there's this antagonism between the different forms of local government. So you get the full range.
I was very intrigued by your one picture you had of the computer lab. There seems to be so many opportunities for intergenerational service, whether it's childcare, teaching, coaching, teaching computer skills. What success has occurred in that space, and why isn't there more of it?
You need creative leadership. So down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, they noticed that they had a lot of elementary school teachers who they were losing when they had children because there wasn't enough childcare. So an entrepreneurial childcare center director said, hey, we'll have a childcare classroom in each school and I'll be the director. So you've got an empty classroom. You'll have a teacher with children. They work for me. And I'm the director who has, 30 classrooms at different elementary schools around your district. And that helps accommodate your teachers so they come back after maternity leave. And it also helps your teen parents have their children and continue in school. And they've been doing that for 20 years. Again, why doesn't every school think about that empty classroom becoming a childcare center? It takes a little bit of creativity. The rules that govern that room are a little bit different than the rules that govern the other rooms in the school, because in New York State, the Office of Children and Family Services has rules about childcare and the Department of Education has rules about the preschool classroom next door. Okay, you're a smart bureaucrat. You know how to read rules and you work through it. It takes a little work, but it takes the willingness to imagine. It's totally possible and we need to start doing more of it.
I have another question from the online audience. Where do school equalization formulas fit into the book? And was there a difference in pre and post-COVID times?
Equalization matters hugely. So in this survey that John and I did in New York State, we did a survey of all local governments and how much they share, and all schools and how much they share. And schools shared more than the local governments. And we're like, why? Schools have this board of cooperative education services that not only provides technical assistance in designing shared agreements, but the poorer partner comes with extra state subsidy money, so they're attractive partners to play. Who wants to play with a poorer neighbor that's going to cost more? It's a voluntary cooperation. So the state does some subsidy to equalize that and make a poor school district an attractive partner. There's nothing like that on the local government side. And we looked at counties for their diversity among all the municipalities within them, their diversity by race, by income, by tax base. And sure enough, the more diverse, the less sharing. You look at that in the schools and you don't see that effect because we have this institution that we created that was purposely to encourage sharing.
Yeah, and New York State is quite aggressive. There's really no cap on the amount of what they call BOCES aid. And so a poor district will contract with the BOCES provider for a service. And so they'll sign a contract, they'll pay money for it. The very next year, they get reimbursed in their state aid formula for some proportion of that money that they spent. The poorer the district is, the more they get reimbursed. So the program is being made whole by these dollars coming in. Not all states do this. Just like not all states provide additional dollars from the state to help renovate a building or build a new building. If you're in the state of Texas and you're going to go build a new school, it's on that local community. There's no state aid, there's no state building aid to build a new building. New York State is quite generous with their aid, but again, it's on a sliding scale. The poorer the community, the more they can do, and the more aid they get. And the wealthier the community, the less state aid they get, which makes sense. But state to state to state, we have 50 different systems, and it gets a little muddled across the states.
And just one more question here. How do you operationalize or define power?
So we had in our survey measures of budgetary control over the school, which a few cities have. Very few have. Charlotte had. And that might explain why they do the stuff they do there. And so we thought, that must be it. Budgetary control over the school, power over. And then we asked various kinds of power with, like joint planning, joint use agreements, using schools to share information, using schools for services. And we discovered that in communities that had power over their schools, they did not do more shared services. But in communities that had power with their schools, they did. And then we started reading literature on power and discovered that sure enough, power with encourages and enables collaborative action. Power over, I'm not sure, might encourage a little shirking or resistance or whatever. So power with seems to be the key. And that comes back to common vision. Communication becomes really critical, building trust, and recognizing that even though liability and rules are your biggest barriers, smart bureaucrats know how to overcome those. And that's why we have insurance, and that's why we have legislators that make rule change. It's all possible.
I wanted to make a quick comment on a phenomenon that's really changed over the last 30 years. 30 years ago, the average tenure of a school superintendent was about 12 to 14 years. They would get their job and stay a long time. And in one generation, it's down to like 4.5 years or something. The turnover is extraordinary. And so you think, well, on the one hand, this is bad because you used to have these senior people that knew what they're doing. They knew everybody in the community. If you've been a superintendent for 10, 12, 14 years, you know everybody, you know how to get things done. And you can use your power to make these arrangements happen. On the flip side, those are folks who were deeply embedded in the rules from a long time ago. And so maybe a different way to think about that is with all the new, this is the optimistic part that maybe a little stretch, who knows, is that with all the turnover, you can get all these new ideas all the time. And so the opportunity for creative thinking outside the box, may be more practical, maybe more frequent with all the turnover. I don't know, an empirical question, I guess.
I have one question for you, and that is, if you were to name one great example that you've encountered in your research, a school district somewhere in the country, which would it be?
I've got one. If
You got one,
yeah,
go
then
for it.
I'll be quick, then you get do yours. There's an amazing shared service agreement up on the Tug Hill Plateau. And this was about 15 years ago. A superintendent went to his board and said, I'm going to need some free time over the next couple of years to partner with the county and a couple other municipal agencies to work on a wind farm. This is when the wind farms were becoming a thing. And so the board gave the superintendent the okay to disappear for a while, to be part of these meetings. There's a Spanish firm that was making the wind turbines. And up at the Tug Hill, they get a lot of snow, but they also get a lot of wind. And so it's a great place to put these turbines up. Right as this was happening, he was laying off teacher after teacher after teacher because the local economy was in the tank. The dairy industry was going south. Kraft had a cheese plant that moved out. Paper companies were leaving. Really a tough time financially for his district. Long story short, he spent about 3.5 years in these meetings, and they finally came up with this agreement between the county, a couple school districts, and the municipalities and the Spanish firm. And they built 150 wind turbines. The money that came into that school district, they hired every teacher back and then some. Okay, so it was a way to just kind of swap clean energy with these big, huge wind turbines that are controversial, but in their community, it was a windfall. It took incredible collaboration and community interest to put these turbines in their community. But the financial benefit to that school district was extraordinary. They reduced their tax rate, so the citizens were happy, and the budget actually increased because they got all this extra money coming into the system. So unique example, not everyone could do that, but real partnership that took multiple years to come to fruition. So a little more complicated and a kind of more bigger bang for the buck on this one, but a good example.
I'm actually really interested in small successes. And
I
so,
like big successes, but like small.
so, you know, because small successes, you can do it, you can achieve it, and then you can move forward and build off that positive energy. So, you know, like we have the 23 schools in the Catskill region that have managed to put together school-based healthcare centers. Their neighbors who don't have them are jealous. They're thinking about how to do it. And part of what our survey shows is that most places do a little. We'd like them all to do a little bit more. If it's taking out down the chain link fence and opening the doors to your schoolyard, that's a first step, and it's actually pretty easy. Opening up your school building at night for what we call hall walkers. Now that there's no more malls for mall walkers, you can have hall walkers that walk around when the janitors are cleaning. Lots of little things, baby steps, you feel comfortable with it, you realize you can do it, then you think for the bigger things. But it's all possible. John talked about teachers not living in the districts. You know why? Because there's no housing. And so schools can play with developers to say, okay, how do we build housing that can attract our teachers to actually live in this district? Because in a lot of rural communities, there's no rental housing at all. So there's lots of possibilities. We just need to get on it.
Right, great, thank you. I'm gonna use my privilege to ask one more different question. As a librarian, I really appreciate that you made it possible to make this book open access. And can you tell us a little more on how did you make that happen?
We paid for it.
Yeah, so I did notice that it's from the grant. So did you have to write that as a part of the grant, or it's a later?
Most grants encourage paying for open access if you can. And we were very interested in making this open access because John and I are now involved in a big project looking at school-based health, and we really want the schools and the healthcare centers in the region we're working with to see what we're up to. So making this open access was part of our community building strategy in that particular region of the state, but also making it open access further. It's expensive and hard to do, but it's worth it. When you make books open access, more people can access them and read them. And this is something that we would love to have administrators of schools and communities all across the country read, because the book talks honestly about the conflicts, but we really try to emphasize the promise so that folks will be ready to move.
The first version of that meeting I'm going to right now amongst the BOCES and all the 12 different communities all coming together right now over the TSD BOCES. The first meeting was about a month ago, and I showed up at that. And on the desk, or on the table at the middle, where Lily Talcott, who's running the whole show, was getting organized and kind of running all the activities they were doing for the big group, was a printed out version of this.
Oh, printed out from here.
So she got the PDF, downloaded the PDF, printed it out, and brought it to the meeting. And I said, "Oh, I should have brought you a paper copy." She said, "No, I already printed it out. All good." Okay, so open access was great because she's got that and she's able to distribute it.
It's beautiful. Thank you for making that happen. And also from the library perspective, we're hopeful that we can influence the publishing industry so that the cost of the OA publishing is closer to what it actually costs for publishing it. But thank you so much. And let's thank doctors again for their inspirational and insightful talk.